Thanks very much, Kate. Thanks everyone for coming to this session this morning. There's plenty of seats. If you do feel a bit chilly up the back, please jump up here. It's beautiful next to the heater. I live in Armidale in New South Wales, and you'd think I'd be used to the cold, but the more I've spent in the cold, the more I feel it, I think. But look, I'm not sure how many of you were here yesterday, but I guess I'm trying to introduce the topic of how do we harness more value or maintain value or capture more value on farm in the lamb supply chain, and really taking a little bit of a different approach to what you've heard in other talks so far today. There's a lot of discussion and vitally important discussion around the on-farm productivity improvements that we need to make as an industry to remain sustainable. And the last speaker in there really spoke and harnessed and zoned in on reproduction and the role of the last two speakers really on the role of reproduction in the sustainability of a business. And I think the sustainability of business generally is very broad, and I think the profitability is one part of it. Environmental management is another, animal health and welfare, I think it's going to become a really major part of our next strategic plan. I think though the context that Jason Tromp was setting this up last night, saying, well, how do we capture value when the market is as high as it is, and how do we remain relevant as producing lamb in what is becoming a really premium product already. So I think that's a really unique challenge, and we need to think about that. I guess to start with, we need to look at, well, where is the demand coming from, and what are the expectations of our customers and ultimately the consumer. So this morning, really putting on our lamb hat and thinking about what is the message that we're wanting to deliver to a consumer, and when that consumer gets to the retail cabinet, how are they making the choice that product, that lamb product that they're preparing for the meal tonight, is the choice that they make when they get to that cabinet. A lot of those decisions are made before they get to retail, but typical situation where an hour or two before you're sitting down for your evening meal, you're thinking about what then you are going to eat. Long gone are the days in more metropolitan areas where you're going to the shops and shopping for the whole week and only going back for that 1 week. It's more and more common that people are going every day, just buying what they need for that next meal and thinking about it at 4:30 in the afternoon. And not only that, they want it prepared within 15 minutes from when they start cooking to when they eat it, 15 minutes. And this is a concept supermarket that's in Milan, in Italy. The Co-op supermarket chain owned 1,500 supermarkets throughout Europe, and this supermarket of the future concept is where a consumer can walk up to a cabinet and find out where that product was from, how was it produced. You walk over to the fruit and veg section and it tells you what herbicides, pesticides and fertilisers were used in the production of that product. You walk over to the bread and you put your hand on the bread and it pops up and says contains gluten. So I want to start thinking about, well, what information are we as red meat producers wanting to communicate to that consumer? How do those consumers then engage with your product? So they'll want to know who you are, where that product came from, how was that animal handled in its life. They're also going to want to know about how is it good for me, human nutrition, food miles, carbon footprint, that type of information as well. But ultimately, they're wanting a solution for a meal. So they're going to buy that product on the provenance, but also on the occasion and the meal that they're wanting to prepare. So we then also need to think about, well, who are our consumers and where are they in the world? We have a really valuable industry. The domestic market is still our largest and most valuable individual market, but growing demand internationally. So our biggest markets on sheep meat from an export point of view are the US. The US east and west coast are where those main consumers are of Australian lamb. On average in the US, they eat the equivalent of 4 chops per person per year. But it's a small percentage of their population doing the heavy lifting on that consumption. But I've been in the Midwest of the US taking meat judging students around, and we actually don't see lamb on a menu in any restaurant that I've been in the 6 times that I've done that trip. 5,000 miles in 2.5 weeks, and we don't see lamb on a menu. The only time you see it at retail is in the student butcher shop at the university when they've been processing lambs for their meat judging competition, and they try and sell it, and most of them just eat it themselves. So a lot of people in the US haven't actually eaten lamb. But it's still a very big market. We also hear a lot about the growth in China. We have a free trade agreement with the US. We also have one with China, and protein demand in China is really growing. But I'll touch on what the affordability and who can pay for that product in China in just a minute. Middle East and North Africa, big market, really. I don't know if you've been into Dubai, anyone, but there's just 5-star hotels everywhere, and they love high quality product, and they are prepared to pay for it. There's also on the other side, throughout that region, a really big demand for mutton products, and so it's a really valuable market for us as well. A big market opportunity lies in the EU. So our quota access into the EU is very limited. 19,000 tonnes of sheep meat quota into the EU. Our neighbours across the ditch, 228,000 tonnes of sheep meat quota, and they only use about 75% of it. And yet we use every kilo of ours. This is where our free trade agreement with the EU could be a game changer for the sheep industry. We're negotiating a free trade agreement with 28 member states. When Britain leave, under what terms, we still don't know. But Britain are pro-trade. I spent 3 years living in Brussels, looking after marketing and market access for Europe and Russia for red meat. And we were heavily involved at the time, going around the members of Parliament in the EU, getting support for a more liberal trade agreement with the EU, and so that laid the foundations for the free trade agreement we're now negotiating. When Britain leave, we have to wait for them to officially leave before we can negotiate a free trade agreement with them, but we're already having those conversations, and long-term trading partners, there's a huge opportunity for us to get more favourable market access conditions into that market. The other important thing is not just looking at those market sizes, but also that piece around who can afford it. So if you look at the China component over there, at the moment there's about 12.5 million households that can afford to buy Australian product. 12.5 million out of 1.2 billion people. So it's really important to understand not only who our consumers are, but where they are, how do we get that product to them. And there's a lot of evolution to happen within the cold chain logistics in that market. But not that far down the track, forecast by 2022 that the middle income earners expand a lot, and there'll be 30-odd million households that can afford to buy Australian product. And that's benchmarked at a household income of 30,000 US equivalent. That's when they're starting to buy more premium products, once they're starting to earn that sort of money. So it's going to grow fairly quickly. When we look at the EU, 500 million people, about 150 million households can afford to buy Australian products. So that's why that's so attractive, that market. It's a high value per kilo market, and really promises to open up some big opportunities. The other one I've got up there is TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's 11 countries ended up completing that deal. The US were part of it, and they pulled out. But there's new markets in there now. Peru, and we completed a free trade agreement with Peru. Totally new market. We don't send anything there, but we will. Duties into Canada and Mexico. Mexico's a potential big opportunity for us as well. Duties go from 26.5% down to 0 when TPP comes into effect. So that market access side is really important. But then the other part, once we get the economic barriers to trade reducing, is then the technical barriers to trade. So one of our challenges into China is that we only have one sheep plant in Australia listed to supply chilled product. The rest of the plants can do frozen, but if we can get more plants listed for chilled, the higher value opportunities come off the back of that as well. So I guess that's just a bit of context in the environment in which we operate. So then we think about how do we, this whole issue of value. We then think about, well, if we understand our consumers, we understand our customers and where they are in the world, what do we need to do in the production system to capitalise on those opportunities? So I've broken this into two parts that, there'll be a lot of conversations about genetics on more specific areas in terms of particularly selecting for fertility, lamb survival, efficiency within your production system. Probably more talking back at more of a strategy level, I guess, on genetics, but then quality. And quality is just something I'm very passionate about. I've spent quite a bit of my career, both commercially and since I've been with MLA, on running the eating quality program, MSA. And it's something that the sheep industry is yet to really see the benefits of. I mean, you're not getting paid for it yet. So we actually have to do something about that. So that's really my focus for the quality discussion. So I think genetics and positioning genetics in the whole farm system and understanding the role of genetics in addressing variation. Now, I've used a beef example here, but it's exactly the same on sheep. It's a slightly different scale. But each one of these different colours is a producer. Each dot represents a carcass. And the reason I've used the beef example is because the variation in value is a combination of yield and quality. We can do the same thing on sheep, just on yield, but because I'm trying to build the quality in, I just thought I'd use a beef example. There's up to $700 difference between the best carcass and the worst. The quantum on sheep, when you're talking about carcasses worth about 250 bucks, I have seen the same data put up just on variation in fat and weight of $100 difference in value from a carcass. So there's considerable value that we miss out on. There's also considerable upside opportunity, I think, for us to do a lot better, but the price signals will also have to evolve and specifications. We'll get into that in a little bit. Please ask any questions as we go, otherwise I'll just keep talking. But I think it's important first to understand what drives variation, and before you start getting paid on it, because we've spoken a lot about the role of technology in both measuring quality and yield at the processing sector, how that can translate into value-based pricing for producers and how you can get paid for what you produce. And if you're doing a better job, you should get rewarded for it, absolutely. The problem is, how do we make sure that if you think you're doing a good job but you're not, that you understand that so you can do something about it before you start getting potentially penalised, I guess, is the challenge. So, you know, in a price averaging system, what are the incentives and how do we make that progress and how do we get you the feedback? I think the other part is then making sure that when we understand the consumer, that then we're starting to see that, again, particularly on the beef side, is that brand specifications are starting to change the way the over-the-hooks grid pricings work, and the signals back to producers is changing and incentivising the right behaviour. So you know, the last speaker spoke about we're not getting the feedback, and I agree with that, but there's some solutions that I want to talk through with you. So then we can start making decisions about the genetic selection, the breeding, the feeding, the finishing, with the market specification in mind. And then I'm also going to talk about, well, what's the role of technology in helping do that? I think we need to understand what's the outcome we're trying to achieve, and then the role of technology in helping us achieve that, not the other way around. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. We are starting a campaign approach to a lot of our extension and adoption activities, and the genetics campaign launches next week. So we're going to make information more readily available and easily accessible, but we also have a framework for how you might get involved. So days like this and events are really about the awareness piece, but then we partner with Ag Victoria on a whole demonstration site program where we can then get into the regions where we understand priorities, and the priorities come from the regions. We can then address those priorities through a targeted and a really robust demonstration site program where we can test and drive change and scale that up from across a larger number of producers. So there's lots of opportunities to, I guess, understand where we're going, but then engaging back with Ag Victoria and looking at how we utilise your network in Best Wool, Best Lamb to really make and drive some of that change in a way that is really well supported. We've got lots of case studies that we'll be sharing as well. I noticed that Ricky was in the audience today, and I didn't put his video up, but that content is there around sharing those experiences that help you understand what people have done and how they've gone about doing that, which is more relevant than me standing up and talking about how to make change more broadly. We are going back to basics where we really need really setting those breeding objectives that fit within your whole production system, and making sure that the role of genetics, and then you have to make so many other decisions, but we position genetics appropriately. And then as a commercial sector, starting to make sure that the seed stock sector is producing the right type of animals for your production system, and then you can also communicate back as to what are your objectives, and identifying which rams to buy that are going to suit that need. I guess the big change for the industry is coming at the end of this month, and we're right at the pointy end of this, is that we're transitioning for life beyond the sheep CRC. For the last 19 years, a lot of our investments in genetics and eating quality work have happened through the sheep CRC. And they leave quite a legacy. That's a lot of IP and a lot of development that's happened over that 19-year period. MLA, we're taking on the products and IP out of those two program areas, genetics and eating quality. The bulk of that is coming across into MLA. The commercial sector has been supported by a single genotyping company in Neogen. We're making sure that there's an uninterrupted service with the commercial genotyping company, but we're also creating a competitive commercial environment. There's a lot more players in the pipeline that are wanting your business, and we'll make sure that we're setting the minimum standards for those genotyping products, and then you can choose who you do business with. Our role at MLA through the Sheep Genetics business unit that sits under me as well is we'll have all of the data and databases. We'll be managing the Lamb Plan Merino Select and databases and service as we currently do. The genotyping databases will also be under our responsibility. So we end up becoming a single source of truth for breeding values, and then how you engage commercially will be an open market. We're working with UNE, who are taking on the Ram Select and the flock profiling work, and we'll be integrating that as a single point of contact, ideally, where all of those services really operate seamlessly. But we're in that transition phase at the moment. I expect by the end of this week, well, I'm hoping, we've actually got all of the wind-up agreements out with all of the participants who have been involved over the last 19 years, and having that agreement signed by this Friday is my plan, because the end of June is coming pretty quickly. The shutters come down for the CRC. They've got to October to finish their reporting, but basically we're at the end of an era in that space. So we have certainly a big responsibility to continue that work going forward. I guess from an eating quality point of view, there has been a lot of investment and a lot of progress made. So adoption around the program continues to gain momentum. There's 19 lamb plants that are MSA licensed, representing about 50% of the annual production of lamb, and a bigger percentage continues to of that product. This is the yellow line here. This is how much product is going into lamb brands that are underpinned by MSA. So the branding is growing. Lamb is a category which is reasonably generic. MSA offers a point of difference in terms of having a quality assurance system around eating quality, but it is a pathway approach. Now, the pathway approach has not really evolved because we don't have the technology yet to do the individual measurement. And people have been questioning, saying, well, are we getting any value out of that? Well, the graph on the right here, before MSA, this was the audit that was done by Murdoch University on loins. This is just loins. This was the variation just in shear force on lamb loins, without any quality assurance within the supply chain. Having a pathway approach to eating quality, we've really been able to tighten up that variation. Yes.
MSA, we have accredited ourselves for MSA.
Yep.
We sell direct to some abattoirs.
Yep.
To the best of my knowledge, we've probably only ever been asked for our MSA status on one kill.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, how does MSA in the lamb industry translate to what's branded onto the carcass?
Yep.
And who's currently getting the benefit of that? And are the supermarket chains chasing MSA? I see it on beef, but not on lamb.
Yes. So where to start there? So when you put your MSA number on your vendor declaration, those lambs, you've done it once. So when you don't do it, those lambs cannot be packed as MSA. When you have done it, they are eligible to be packed as MSA. They then have to meet the requirements that we've set up for the processing work on weight, fat, pH and temperature declines. They can then batch those MSA eligible lambs to go into an MSA brand. As we saw, the wrong way. Hang on, pressing the same button and expecting a different result. So as you can see though, that even if lambs are sent in as eligible, not all of them are being packed as MSA, but that is changing over time. At the moment, JBS were here yesterday, so I use them as an example where and others have got their own farm assurance type programs. Where we're seeing the benefit is where they're building MSA as a requirement, as a minimum standard to be a farm assured supplier, and there's a price difference for farm assured versus non-farm assured lambs. That's where price differences are at the moment. As far as those brand specifications for lamb passing back a premium specifically for that brand back to producers, it's not happening yet. But this is where I think the opportunity is, and the problem is that whilst the pathway approach has improved, where 20% of loins were failing to meet a consumer expectation, that has reduced considerably now. The next step is exactly that, but we have to be able to differentiate at an individual carcass level for that to happen, in my view, which is where I'm going next, because a cuts-based model would be a game changer, and I think that is really where we can capture more value, because if you're consistently producing product that is 4 or 5 star, and we can identify that at an individual carcass level, they'll set up a brand if they have enough volume to do that. Yes?
Michael, do you think that compliance rate is because of something the producers have done to meet the FDA standard, or do you think it's actually something, or would you know, that it's something that's happened within the processes, like electricity or like
Yes.
something else? So
It's actually the processes have done that.
You don't have to do anything. I don't mean that literally, but there's not a lot of boxes you have to tick to be MSA graded.
That's right.
They only have to grow in so fast.
Sure.
So what you're saying is
So they were stuffing a lot of lambs up by cold shortening the hell out of them in the processing plant. So putting quality assurance in there and managing the rate of pH and temperature decline to an optimum level has been a significant contributor to that reduction in variation. However, in the producer's control is managing that negative correlation between improving lean meat yield, which is absolutely a driver of profit, without stuffing up quality, because as lean meat yields go up, intramuscular fat levels are in a steady decline. And that's the risk for the industry. And if we think about maintaining consumer acceptability of that product, we have to make sure that if we are going to increase yield, which we still need to do, we also need to find those animals that we can improve quality as well. And that's really where our on-farm production system has a significant role to play. But at the moment, which is where I guess I'm getting to next, is that I'll learn this how to drive this shortly, is that without a cuts-based model and without the individual measure of IMF, there's not the incentive to select harder for these quality traits. If we don't select for the quality traits, we're not going to produce a big enough volume of better eating quality product to go into a brand that is going to capture more value, which is why I think it's so vitally important. And you'll see that one of the areas that we miss, so we can know whether it's a terminal, maternal or merino sire. So it's a sire type, not necessarily a breed. Carcass weight we know. We don't have technology yet to measure IMF at chain speed, and that's one of the biggest barriers to implementing a cuts-based model. Because the processors that I speak to, and the ones that haven't adopted MSA, and even the ones that have that want to do better, is just saying, well, unless we can identify that premium product, we're probably not going to be able to pass on a premium back to producers above our base rate. If we can identify those cuts that are 4 or 5 star, that are going to be premium, they have markets for it and they have customers who can pay more. So that to me is a very positive message in that this will be an incentivised system. And I'll get into the technology in a minute, but consumers are willing to pay more. If you use 3 star as a baseline, people will buy a product that fails, but they're only prepared to pay half as much for it. If you give them a 4 or 5 star product, we're at another 50 to 100% above a 3 star rate. So this is all the opportunity in the pipeline. This is sheep. This is just on sheep, but remarkably similar to beef. But this was sheep work that was done in Australia, China and the US. Yep. It just so happened to be our big markets. Look, whilst there's a lot of challenges, there's some solutions here. And I think this is a relatively positive story. Now, I'm not going to be as ambitious as one of our researchers last week who came out in the meeting and said, we'll deliver some of this stuff in 12 months. I think let's say it's 12 months to 3 years, but within the next 3 years, I think we'll have some solutions commercialised and getting feedback back to you. So we're making a lot of investment in objective measurement technologies. You will have heard a bit about DEXA, and I'll take you through what the benefits of DEXA are in just a minute. We're also looking at eating quality, but also animal health. So imagine if you can get feedback on an individual animal level on liver damage, and looking at how do you get incentivised for that as well. It'd be very interesting, I think, to then look at your parasite management as well. So that's the sort of stuff that is coming back. So DEXA is an X-ray imaging system. It was developed to run automation. I'll show you how that works in a minute, but it also gives us lean bone and fat. Through the sheep CRC, they've developed an algorithm from the image to be able to give you lean meat yield. So the opportunity now is for those companies who have installed DEXA to drive automation. They can also now develop lean meat yield, and they're just working out. You're at an advantage here in Victoria because you do have EID to get individual animal feedback. I think that what they're still trying to sort out, and Kate will correct if I'm wrong here, but the hook tracking piece then becomes really important as well, because once we've removed the ear tag, we just need to make sure we can track those animals through the rest of the supply chain. Because where DEXA is being used is in driving the automation. It's in the it's just before it goes into the boning room. So no one is like so we're slaughtering those animals. They chill overnight and then going into the boning room. So we've got to get the information from the day after slaughter linked back into those feedback systems, but it's all very doable. So there's a bit of pre-trimming going on. These lambs are then going around the corner. They go through the DEXA. The DEXA is pre-programmed based on the specifications for cutting lines, and it will just tell the robot exactly where to cut. That single cutting line between the shoulder and the rack, they reckon, pays for this machine in 3 years. Because of the difference, just because in the difference between the value of a shoulder versus a rack, having that precision down to a millimetre pays for that equipment in 3 years. But also coupled with that, you haven't got people operating bandsaws. These dish saws don't have as much bone dust that they leave on the surface of the meat, so they're picking up shelf life with less people handling as well. But people's hygiene is very good in the plants. But the yield and the shape of each cut is just phenomenal. And it's mesmerising to stand in the plant and watch all this go through. They can run, the equipment's keeping up very easily, 10 a minute, no worries at all. I think they can do double that. So it's the efficiency is really fantastic. Now we're looking at it's the DEXA that's driving all of that, so you'll be able to get the feedback. The other thing we're looking at is how, particularly down here where that light that flashes is just measuring how far from the ribeye they're wanting to cut the ribs. If that can also measure IMF, and we've got hook tracking, we can give that feedback back as well. And the technologies that we're looking at from an eating quality point of view are some camera technologies with hyperspectral imaging, or whether it might be probes that are doing sort of reflectance stuff. This is a hyperspectral camera. Whilst that's a beef example, this is just showing the outputs here, so it can do eye muscle area, can tell meat from fat, and it can do marbling. So at least at that level, we can get we can collect IMF. The problem is that you need a cut surface. There aren't any plants that I've seen in Australia that are opening up, ribbing lambs before they go into the boning room. So we're looking at other probes, because they can also then, if you just put this probe in, this came out of the medical industry where it just works off different waves of reflectance, and you put the probe in, and if it can tell us IMF, then we've got an automatic input into the model. We're also looking at whether you can do this hot versus cold. So if you could do this on the slaughter floor, how much earlier in that chain can you collect that information? But very much in R&D phase, and what that means is we still have some work to do on this one. This is some technology used in the mining industry. They use it to determine different minerals within rocks. But NIR technology, near infrared spectroscopy, we're looking at whether it can help us with red meat as well, whether it can do IMF, whether it can do connective tissue and things that we can't see as well. Soma optics, this is a device used in Japan for assessing the amount of fat in tuna. And if you think about the value of tuna, it seems to be working quite well. So we've had this at UNE only a couple of weeks ago. it's all sort of proof of concept sort of stage at the moment, but there's a few different commercial devices that we've tested all on the same lambs, and we compare that back to a chemical fat. This is Raman spectroscopy. This is just another really simple one that again does need a cut surface there, but you've only got to take a little bit of fat off and put it against the meat. So there's just quite a few technologies in the pipeline that I think one of them will win and one of them will then be able to be implemented commercially. Then how do we do this live as well? So I mean, if we can predict animal performance before we consign them, you can also make some better decisions back on farm in terms of yield and quality. So we're looking at live animal DEXA. This microwave technology is looking at quality. The challenge with this technology is the guy operating it, and who also works for Murdoch University, just so happens to be a bit of an engineer, and he made this just to look at microwave technology, but it's showing some promise to be able to replace ultrasound scanning potentially for IMF in live animals. So that's the sort of work that's in the pipeline. I was very interested around the comments made around technology, and we've had a very similar experience from the previous speakers in that there's a lot out there. There's a lot of promises being made. There's a lot of technology providers who have clearly spoken to producers about what they might want, but it's a huge shopping list of all the things they say their devices can do. So at the end of last year, my colleague Sean Starling really drove this. He did a fantastic job. Found a property. It's about 6,000 hectares, Kabul Station. It's across a few different places near Canberra actually, where we had the AGM, so it was pretty handy. And invited over 150 providers to come and put their equipment on, and he entitled his workshop From the Hype to the Happening. Out of the 150 providers, 20 turned up to put in their gear. Some of them worked, some didn't, but there were over 200 devices on this place. Interestingly, out of the 150 invited, 20 turned up, and of the 20, some of them had to come and collect their stuff because it actually didn't work like they said it was going to. Now, there's actually it's not really a criticism of those companies. I mean, they have a lot of good ideas, but they've come from, a lot of the time, from other industries. Someone had a trough sensor that they had to come and get because they didn't think it was robust enough to have an animal around it. So, you know, there's a journey, it's a long journey from a good idea to developing a prototype to then actually having it market ready. So I guess all I'm saying is that when you're looking at the technology, and these are the companies that installed their gear, but we've got a list on our website of the 150 providers and of the ones who we have worked with and proven their technology is robust enough and actually does work, and it has led to commercialisation of some of the tech. It's not a bad place just to start if you are looking at installing water monitoring, sensor technology, pasture monitoring stuff. Just come and have a look at what we've road tested, because don't let me hold you back. If you've got someone with a great product that that just nails what you want to do, go for it. But if you are a bit unsure, come and have a yarn to us, because we've tested a fair bit of stuff. There's still a few things that are in the marketplace that still haven't really been tested within these sort of demonstration site properties. We're also looking at our demonstration site program being run on these places, so when we've got what we're trying to do with animals and pastures and soils and reproduction technology, demonstrating genotyping technologies and things, we run it on these properties with all of the other tech as well, and see what we can measure remotely. But there's a few things missing, like walkover weighing is available commercially, but we couldn't get any of the providers to put it on the property. There's a lot of tags. There's a lot of tags that say they can do a lot. Some of them are commercialised, but we just haven't got them in animals on these places. We've also got tags that say they do a lot that don't have a single tag in an animal. So we just need to, I think you just need to make sure that there's evidence behind the claims. I guess that's all I'm saying, but I think there's huge potential with those smart tags, and I think some are working quite well commercially anyway. Virtual fencing, interestingly, in some states, virtual fencing, due to legislation issues, can't be commercialised, so we're working through that. But lots of demand. we're investing separately on autonomous systems. There's autonomous vehicles being tested in Northern Australia at the moment, drones as well. Feeding systems, not yet. Electric vehicles, and automation and advancement in centre pivot irrigation and things like that. So there's still a fair bit in the pipeline. The other missing piece is around connectivity. So on the left here, we've got where all the stations are, and these green bits here are where the connectivity is. So you can see there's a little bit of a misalignment, but it's also, the green bit reflects where the population are, not necessarily where we're farming, where we have farming businesses. So connectivity is such a huge challenge. But I kind of like this case study of Murchison House in Western Australia, and Callum was on our panel at the AGM, but I'll just let you have a look at his experience, and I reckon if he can solve connectivity where he is, there's hope for the rest of us. Pretty rough block in places, but I think he's got some good country down the flat as well. Pretty big place.
Welcome to Toolong Escarpment, a 150 million year old coral reef that forms the backbone of Murchison House Station. Like a lot of Australia's rangeland country, it's beautiful, but it's rugged and it's punishing on the men, women and machines that manage it. The whole of farm monitoring system that we're working on with Origo Farms aims to significantly reduce the time and costs associated with that management. The initial phase, phase 1, is a water monitoring system. It will control all tanks with flow meters and level switches. Instead of a 250 kilometre drive 3 times a week to check our waters, I should simply get an alert on my phone when anything drops below normal. Further down the track, we'll have cameras and automatic gates on our water traps and mustering points, allowing me to know exactly where my stock are and when they're moving, making mustering better targeted and far more efficient. The third phase, well, we're into controlling irrigation. Sluice gates or centre pivot irrigation, all controlled from your smartphone or tablet. Your vehicle really will become your office, and the efficiency and cost savings are really too much to be described. Even in its first phase, the vehicle maintenance savings I think will be significant. That's without even including the fact that we can target our staff's work instead of sending them off on a Sunday drive to just check out what's going on. The future is here, and well, we're making it happen right now.
So Callum ran a field day on his place only a couple of weeks ago, and 6 months after he filmed that, he's worked out that just in labour costs and vehicle maintenance, he's saving about $30,000 a year in his remote water monitoring setup across his place. So it's pretty impressive. And look, we don't have long to go here. So look, and I kind of like this slide just to try and bring it all together, because 2025 isn't far away. The investments that we make today are really shaping where we're going here, but as the volume of genomic testing goes up, it will get cheaper and become routine, and we really need to be breeding animals with the end market in mind. If we can then also get objective measurements of yield and quality before we consign them, we can make better decisions. Getting that feedback, clear message from you today that we need to nail that. But brand specifications are evolving rapidly to meet our customer demand, and those specifications will determine price signals in the future. But hopefully we are heading down this path of value-based pricing. But then we also need to link the live animal information to the cuts and portions, and consumers ultimately are going to purchase on provenance, meal occasion and quality. So we are definitely on this journey. But anyway, thanks for your time today.
Authorised by Victorian Government, 1 Treasury Place, Melbourne.